They say only the brave stick around. If you're one of them, hit subscribe and prepare yourself. He was everybody's friend, the man you'd trust with your keys, your secrets, even your children. Robert Owens moved quietly among his neighbors, attending church picnics, helping with fundraisers, and volunteering with local law enforcement. For 20 years, no one suspected the truth. Owens was not only a trusted face, but a predator who committed 7 murders across 4 states, hiding behind a mask of respectability. The detail that finally exposed him wasn't a confession or a careless mistake. It was a single photograph, captured by a trail camera programmed to snap an image every 14 days at 3 a.m., a fragment of evidence that shattered the illusion. Owens is just one example of how the most dangerous threats often hide in plain sight. And he wasn't the only one. If stories like this make you question what you think you know, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. There are more unsettling truths to uncover, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Robert Owens moved through Clearwater County with a quiet purpose. He was the sort of man people described as reliable, short, soft-spoken, nearing 60. He slipped easily into the background of every gathering. His presence at the library, the historical society, and the town council felt as permanent as the old courthouse clock. Residents remembered the way he listened more than he spoke, and how he'd show up to events with a plate of homemade cookies or a stack of neatly typed sign-up sheets. He was the first to help set up folding chairs at a fundraiser and the last to leave after cleaning up. As a retired accountant, he had a reputation for precision. His books always balanced, his word always kept. If you needed someone to watch your house or organize a tax clinic, Owens was the safe bet. His involvement with the sheriff's department only deepened that trust. He volunteered for community programs, managed evidence room inventory, and read to children during public safety days. No one questioned his motives. The sheriff later described him as steady and unremarkable, a man who did what was asked and never drew attention. What no one knew was that Owens's access ran deeper than anyone realized. He quietly took evidence bags from the department, slipping them into his own supplies, an act that let him cover his tracks and stay a step ahead of any investigation. Owens's integration into the community wasn't just a matter of habit. It was a tactic. He attended church events, helped neighbors move furniture, and made a point of showing up to nearly every town function. He was careful to build relationships with people who had influence or information, especially those in law enforcement. One deputy remembered him as always around, always helpful, never in the way. In reality, Owens was using these connections to monitor investigations, gather rumors, and keep himself informed about anything that might threaten his secret. Over the years, Owens's methodical approach to stalking his victims became clear. He chose people whose routines he could observe, women who attended church alone, men who drifted through town for seasonal work, or residents who had few close ties. He studied their habits for months, keeping detailed notes in journals he hid in a compartment beneath his basement stairs. The journals, discovered after his arrest, revealed a chilling level of detail. Names, dates, sketches of burial sites, and even photographs of his victims before and after their deaths. His entries were clinical and detached, as if he were cataloging specimens rather than human lives. One line stood out. "The trick is to be ordinary enough to be trusted, but forgettable enough to disappear in plain sight. Watch those who think they're watching." Owens often met his victims at community events or through his volunteer work, sometimes even at search parties for missing residents. He would blend into their lives, sometimes for months before making his move. He planted himself in their routines, learned their vulnerabilities, and waited for the right moment. He never rushed. The people he targeted were often isolated, with few connections to the rest of the town. He listened in on conversations, sometimes using small recording devices hidden in public spaces, and made note of anything that might help him avoid detection. The illusion began to unravel in April 2011. A hunter, checking a trail camera set to take a photograph every 14 days at exactly 3 a.m., found images that didn't make sense. The camera, placed deep in the woods outside Clearwater County, captured Owens dragging a tarp-wrapped object through the brush. The images were grainy, but the man's posture and clothing were unmistakable. Investigators traced the location and found human remains buried less than a mile from where the photos were taken. The remains were identified as Melissa Carson, a woman who had disappeared 5 years earlier. That discovery led to a search warrant for Owens's property. In his basement, investigators found the hidden journals, each entry more disturbing than the last. The pages described not only the murders, but also Owens's fascination with the process of evasion. He wrote about attending vigils for his victims, standing among grieving friends and family, and feeling invisible. "No one so much as glanced at me," he wrote. "It's almost insulting how easily they overlook what's in front of them." In another entry, he detailed a moment at a church potluck, sitting across from the mother of a woman he had killed, noting her laughter and the way she offered him a second helping of pie. The journals also revealed how Owens used his insider access to law enforcement to his advantage. He monitored the progress of investigations by listening in on conversations at the sheriff's office and reading case files while volunteering. He used stolen evidence bags to dispose of incriminating items, confident that no one would suspect him. His calm demeanor and willingness to help allowed him to deflect suspicion, even when neighbors began to notice odd behavior, like being seen near someone's house late at night. When confronted, he always had a plausible explanation, and people believed him. As the investigation continued, more remains were found in wooded areas across 4 states. Each discovery matched an entry in Owens's journals. The victims were people the community had mourned and searched for, never suspecting that the man organizing search parties or comforting families was responsible for their disappearances. The most unsettling detail was how Owens seemed to relish the challenge of remaining undetected. He described small tests, moving objects in victims' homes, attending police briefings, even inserting himself into conversations about the missing. For him, the real thrill was not in the violence, but in the act of deception. When the evidence became overwhelming, Owens was brought in for questioning. He maintained his innocence, insisting that the trail camera images were a misunderstanding and that the journals were works of fiction. But the details were too precise, the photographs too damning. Eventually, faced with the weight of his own words, Owens confessed to 7 murders. He refused to name all his victims, hinting that there might be others, and offered no remorse. The news sent shockwaves through Clearwater County. Residents struggled to reconcile the man they thought they knew with the reality of his crimes. People remembered sharing meals with him, praying beside him, and trusting him with their children. The betrayal was profound. One neighbor, who had once confronted Owens about his late-night presence near her home, recalled how easily he had reassured her and how deeply that trust now haunted her. For law enforcement, the case was a reminder that the most dangerous people are often those who seem the least threatening. Owens didn't hide in shadows or wear a mask. He blended in, relying on the comfort of routine and the power of trust. His story left the community questioning not just their own judgment, but the very nature of safety in a place where everyone knows everyone else. Sometimes the line between what is seen and what is hidden is thinner than anyone realizes. Even the safest homes can hold secrets that go unnoticed. until the smallest sign reveals what's been lurking just out of sight. Ellen Blackwood's story began with a sound that barely registered at first, a faint, persistent tapping in the walls during the cold months of early 2016. She told herself it was just the old bones of her Victorian house settling, but her unease grew as her cat started reacting to invisible disturbances, staring at corners or pawing at the air near the bookcase. Then groceries began to vanish. A loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, things she knew she hadn't eaten. Ellen lived alone, and though she tried to explain it away as forgetfulness, the sense of being watched only deepened. By April 2016, she called the Pinewood County Sheriff's Office, hoping for reassurance, but fearing the worst. Sheriff Maya Cortez arrived on a gray morning, prepared for what she expected to be a routine welfare check. The Blackwood home, built by Ellen's great-uncle Edmund, was one of the oldest in town, a sprawling structure with creaking floors and drafty windows. Ellen's anxiety was clear. "I know it sounds strange," she told the sheriff, "but I feel like someone's here." Cortez listened, her skepticism fading as Ellen described not only the missing food, but also the subtle shifts in her belongings. A picture frame tilted, keys moved from their usual place. The sheriff began her inspection methodically, checking doors and windows, searching for signs of forced entry and finding none. The oddities kept piling up. In the basement, Cortez noticed a thin, deliberate seam in the brickwork, almost invisible except for the way the dust collected along its edge. She pressed her hand to it and felt the wall give slightly. With a little effort, she revealed a hidden door. Behind it, a narrow passage. Cortez called for backup, and the search expanded. Over the next several hours, deputies uncovered a network of crawl spaces, narrow tunnels, and concealed rooms running behind the walls. These weren't the result of careless renovations. The craftsmanship was precise, the design intentional. Small peepholes had been drilled into walls overlooking the kitchen and living room. Observation slots were hidden behind grates and inside closets. Some tunnels led to other parts of the house, while others had partially collapsed with age. The most unsettling find was a hidden room tucked behind the pantry, containing a thin mattress, wrappers from old candy, and a battered notebook. There was also evidence of a secondary entrance, a storm drain outside the property, which allowed someone to slip in and out without being seen. Ellen stood in the kitchen as the deputies worked, her sense of safety unraveling with every new discovery. The realization that someone had been living in such close proximity, watching her through the walls, was almost too much to bear. The sheriff's team swept the house, but the intruder remained elusive until dusk. Then, crouched in a cramped passage behind the pantry, they found Gabriel Mercer. He was thin, filthy, and calm, offering no resistance as he was led out. Mercer admitted to living in the house for about 6 months, surviving on Ellen's food and water siphoned from hidden pipes. As investigators dug into Mercer's background, it became clear this was not a random squatter. Mercer had studied the house's history, focusing on the architectural quirks left behind by Edmund Blackwood. Edmund, a reclusive contractor, built or renovated at least 11 homes in Pinewood County between the 1940s and 1950s. His signature was the inclusion of secret rooms, hidden passages, and peepholes, features so well integrated that most owners never noticed them. In Ellen's house, the network was especially elaborate, with multiple concealed spaces and access points. Mercer's notebook, found in the hidden room, was filled with detailed observations, dates, times, notes on Ellen's routines, and even sketches of the house's interior from behind the walls. The entries stretched back years and included notes on previous tenants. One line read, "They never look up. the eyes that might be watching from above. Mercer had used the hidden spaces not just to observe but to manipulate, moving objects and creating small disturbances to unsettle the people living there. When word of the case spread, former residents of Blackwood Homes came forward with their own stories. Strange noises, missing items, the sense of being watched. Investigators inspected the other properties tied to Edmund Blackwood and found that at least 7 contained similar hidden features. In 3 of these homes, residents described experiences that mirrored Ellen's, though none had evidence of current occupation. The scale of the threat was larger than anyone had imagined, and the realization that these architectural secrets had enabled such violations unsettled the entire community. One detail stood out in every property: a small triangle inside a circle, often carved discreetly under windowsills or into basement beams. The symbol's purpose was never explained, but its consistent presence suggested a deliberate marking system, perhaps Edmund's way of identifying homes with hidden rooms, or a code for those who knew how to find them. The discovery of the same symbol in a case across the state line in eastern Washington, where another man was found living in the walls of a suburban home, only deepened the mystery. That man's journal mirrored Mercer's, describing months of undetected surveillance. During questioning, Mercer offered little insight beyond a chilling admission. People are most interesting when they think they're alone. He described his victims as subjects, not individuals, and seemed unmoved by the harm he'd caused. Sheriff Cortez, shaken by the case, oversaw a full survey of every Blackwood property. 7 homes in Pinewood County were found to contain secret rooms and passages. None were currently occupied, but the fear lingered. Homeowners flooded the sheriff's office with calls, desperate for reassurance or inspection. The Blackwood case changed how Sheriff Cortez viewed her work and the town itself. She had always seen homes as sanctuaries, but now every wall and floorboard seemed suspect. Pinewood County soon formed a task force to inspect and secure all homes built or renovated by Edmund Blackwood, a step no one had imagined would ever be necessary. The sense of violation ran deep, and for Ellen, the trauma was enough to force her to leave her family home behind. As the story faded from the headlines, the questions remained. The hidden dangers in Ellen's house had been revealed, but the unease, knowing that safety can be an illusion, lingered in Pinewood County. And just as the community began to reckon with the secrets in their own walls, another kind of threat was already waiting in the wild places beyond town, where trust and danger took on a different shape. Martin Blackwood was the man people trusted to lead them into the wild. In Iron County, Michigan, his reputation as a wilderness guide and survival instructor was nearly unshakable. He'd spent over 15 years teaching hikers, campers, and even local search and rescue teams how to read animal tracks, find shelter, and move quietly through the trees. His voice was always calm, his advice practical. To many, Blackwood seemed as much a part of the forest as the pines and the silent lakes. "You listen to the forest," he'd say to his trainees. "The forest will always tell you what you need to know." But for years, the forest held its own secrets. From the late 1990s into the next decade, a pattern of disappearances began to trouble Iron County. People went missing, sometimes solo hikers, sometimes seasoned outdoorsmen, sometimes those who simply strayed from marked trails. At first, each case was written off as a tragic accident. The wilderness was vast, the weather unforgiving, and the terrain easy to get lost in. Yet the investigations always came up empty. There were no remains, no clear signs of animal predation, and no evidence left behind except for the occasional abandoned campsite or scattered personal belongings. The lack of answers gnawed at those who searched. Sheriff Mark Callahan, who had grown up in Iron County and spent his career there, tried to accept the explanations that made sense on paper. Still, he couldn't ignore the unease that grew with every case. The missing included people like Kyle Brennan, an experienced hiker who left a detailed itinerary with friends and vanished without a trace, and Lisa Chen, who fell behind her group on a well-traveled loop and was never seen again. Sean Fletcher, a local trail runner, disappeared on a foggy morning, his tracks simply ending at a bend in the path. The cases shared a strange consistency: no bodies, no clear cause, just silence. The FBI was finally brought in after 3 disappearances in less than 2 years. Their profiling unit suggested something no one wanted to consider. These were not accidents. The perpetrator, they said, had advanced survival skills, military or law enforcement training, and an intimate knowledge of the land. The profile pointed to someone who moved freely in the forest, someone trusted by the community and familiar with the routines of hikers and search teams. When the list of possible suspects was narrowed, Martin Blackwood's name surfaced more than once. Blackwood had always been eager to help. He joined search parties, advised deputies on likely routes, and mapped out areas he claimed were important to check. People remembered him working late into the night, drawing on his knowledge to guide others. No one thought to question his motives. He was invisible, Sheriff Callahan later said. Not because he hid, but because we trusted him to show us the way. The turning point came from a graduate student named Maria Delgado. She was conducting wildlife research in the National Forest and had set up motion-activated cameras to monitor deer and small mammals. One of those cameras, set deep in the woods near an old search area, captured a blurry image of Blackwood. He was carrying a backpack and what looked like surveying equipment, moving through a patch of brush at a time when no one else should have been there. The location was remote, more than 2 miles from the nearest road, accessible only on foot. The FBI acted quickly. Using the camera's coordinates, tactical teams swept the area and found what they'd been missing for years: a shelter expertly camouflaged and nearly invisible beneath a thick canopy. The site was deep in National Forest land, far from any marked trail. Inside, investigators found personal effects belonging to several missing persons: necklaces, watches, scraps of clothing, and a battered tin box filled with small trinkets. The most disturbing discovery was a set of notebooks in Blackwood's handwriting. The journals revealed the full scope of Blackwood's crimes. He described his process for selecting victims, focusing on those he believed were unprepared or careless. He wrote about watching hikers from a distance, testing their awareness by leaving subtle markers or moving their gear. His entries graded each victim on awareness and skill, as if he were an examiner and the forest his classroom. "The woods sort the weak from the strong," one entry read. "I only speed up the process." Some notes were chillingly specific. She never noticed the second trail marker, failed to check her compass, unfit. Another: he panicked at the sound. Nature doesn't forgive panic. The journals also described how Blackwood used his military training to avoid detection. He chose locations for his crimes that would speed up decomposition and attract scavengers, making it nearly impossible to recover remains. He tracked search teams' movements, sometimes even joining them, and adjusted his routines to stay one step ahead. In his mind, he believed he was enforcing a kind of natural law. "If you can't survive the wild, you don't belong in it," he wrote. "I am only the judge." Maria Delgado's camera provided the final piece of evidence that tied Blackwood to the disappearances. The image placed him near a research area just days after another hiker had gone missing. When confronted, Blackwood remained calm, offering little more than the phrase he'd repeated in his journals: "The forest decides." He showed no remorse, no sense of guilt. The FBI's psychological evaluation concluded that Blackwood suffered from a severe personality disorder marked by grandiosity, a lack of empathy, and a fixation on his own authority in the wilderness. Sheriff Callahan struggled with the fallout. He had worked alongside Blackwood for years, trusting him with the safety of others. "The hardest part to accept," he said, "wasn't just that evil existed in our community, it's that it wore such a convincing mask of normalcy." The community reeled as the truth came out. Blackwood had been a fixture at local events, a mentor to young guides and a source of comfort during search operations. Now his name was a warning. Iron County responded with sweeping changes. Background checks became mandatory for all outdoor instructors, and new safety briefings warned hikers to be vigilant, not just for wildlife, but for the possibility that danger could come from anyone, even those who seemed most trustworthy. The Iron County Wilderness Center was reorganized with tighter oversight and protocols for reporting missing persons. Local guides began to stress a simple rule: always share your route, never hike alone, and remember that the greatest threat in the wild might not be the elements, but another person. Blackwood's story left a scar that ran deeper than the trails he once walked. Those who had learned from him, who had followed his lead into the woods, now looked back with suspicion and regret. The sense of safety in Iron County was changed, maybe forever. The forest still stands, and hikers still come, but the lessons of trust and vigilance are never far from mind. As investigators closed the case, they began to notice something else. Small details that didn't quite fit, marks and symbols found near some of the old campsites, and even in places far from Iron County. These signs raised new questions about whether Blackwood was truly acting alone, or if there were other connections waiting to be uncovered. The triangle inside a circle first appeared as nothing more than a curious mark. Sheriff Maya Cortez found it near the entry to a hidden passage in Ellen Blackwood's house, carved into the wood beneath layers of paint and dust. At first it seemed like a harmless eccentricity, perhaps a relic from Edmund Blackwood's days as a builder, a flourish left behind by a craftsman with a fondness for secret places. But as investigators looked deeper, the symbol's meaning grew darker. Every house linked to Edmund Blackwood revealed the same mark, always hidden in places few would ever think to check. Under windowsills, behind support beams, tucked into the backs of closets. Some homes had several, each one cut with a precision that suggested careful intent. The size and shape were always the same, as if Blackwood used a template to ensure consistency. It was never displayed openly, always secreted away where only someone looking for it, or someone who already knew, would find it. As the cases unfolded, the symbol's reach became more apparent. Gabriel Mercer, who had spent months living behind Ellen's walls, carried a battered notebook filled with sketches of the same triangle and circle. He offered no explanation when questioned, only muttering, "Not every door was built to be opened." Law enforcement found the symbol in other homes built or renovated by Blackwood, each time paired with hidden rooms or passageways. The pattern was too deliberate to ignore. It didn't take long for the investigation to outgrow Pinewood County. When word spread about the symbol's discovery, authorities in Michigan, Oregon, and Georgia reported finding the same triangle and circle on properties with concealed spaces, many of which shared the same architectural quirks as Blackwood's work. In each case, the symbol was hidden, never decorative, always out of sight, as though it served as a quiet marker for those who knew to look. The growing list of locations prompted the formation of a multi-jurisdictional task force, pooling resources and combing through records to find other possible connections. The symbol's consistency suggested a system, a way to identify homes that contained secret rooms or passageways. In Edmund Blackwood's case, it was his signature, a silent guide for those who followed in his footsteps. Investigators began to see the homes as part of a network, each one marked and prepared, waiting for someone to exploit its secrets. The realization unsettled both law enforcement and residents, who began to question how many houses in their own neighborhoods might carry the same hidden threat. The presence of the symbol on Blackwood's own headstone confirmed its importance. The same triangle inside a circle, carved discreetly into the stone, stood as a final marker of his legacy. It was not a flourish or a random design, but a deliberate stamp, one that tied his work and the crimes that followed into a single, chilling narrative. The fact that Mercer had learned from Blackwood and used his designs to carry out his own acts only deepened the sense of a shared ideology, or at least a common purpose. The investigation soon revealed that the symbol was never associated with Robert Owens. While Owens's crimes were methodical and hidden in plain sight, there was no evidence he used or recognized the triangle and circle. His methods were his own, and the properties tied to his victims showed no trace of the mark that linked Blackwood and Mercer. This distinction became important as the multi-state task force sifted through old cases, careful not to draw false connections in the search for answers. Still, the symbol's appearance in so many places raised difficult questions. In Iron County, Michigan, investigators found it in a dilapidated hunting lodge once used by Edmund Blackwood. The symbol was faint, nearly erased by time and weather, but unmistakable. Inside, the construction matched the hidden spaces found in Blackwood's other properties. The lodge had been abandoned for years, yet the symbol was fresh enough to suggest it had been revisited, possibly by someone who knew its significance, or by another who had adopted Blackwood's methods. As the task force continued its work, they began to notice the symbol cropping up in unexpected places. A police officer in Pennsylvania reported seeing it carved into the frame of an old tenement building, long since abandoned and now a haven for squatters. In Oregon, a family discovered the mark behind a false wall in their attic, leading to a cramped space that had been used for who knew what purpose. Each new sighting brought a fresh sense of unease, as if the symbol were a signal, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. The investigation expanded to include cold cases, with teams poring over photographs and property records, searching for any sign of the triangle and circle. In several instances, the discovery of the mark led to the reopening of unsolved disappearances, and in some, to the realization that families had lived for years in homes designed for surveillance or intrusion. The scale of the hidden network was impossible to measure, but the evidence pointed to a deliberate, coordinated effort. Whether Blackwood had acted alone or as part of something larger remained unclear. For the communities affected, the discovery of the symbol changed everything. Homeowners who had once felt safe now looked at their walls and floors with suspicion, wondering what secrets might be hidden behind the plaster and beams. Law enforcement struggled to reassure residents, even as they admitted that the full extent of the network was still unknown. The symbol's presence in so many places, always hidden, always precise, suggested that the danger was never as far away as anyone wanted to believe. The most disturbing part was the uncertainty. Investigators could not say for sure what the symbol meant to those who used it. Did it serve as a guide for people like Mercer, marking homes with hidden rooms for those who wanted to watch or intrude? Or was it something darker? A badge of membership, a signal passed between those who shared Blackwood's fascination with secrecy and control? The answers remained just out of reach, buried beneath layers of time and silence. As the task force pressed on, the symbol lingered in every conversation and every new report. It became a reminder that even the most ordinary places could hide extraordinary dangers, and that the line between safety and threat was thinner than anyone realized. The discovery forced law enforcement to confront the uncomfortable truth that trust, once lost, is hard to regain. And for the sheriffs and investigators who uncovered these secrets, the work was far from over. They found themselves asking how to move forward when the familiar had become so deeply unsettling, and what it would take to protect their communities from threats they could barely see. For law enforcement, the aftermath of these cases was not just a reckoning, it was a transformation. The discovery that predators could hide behind neighborly smiles and familiar faces forced sheriffs and deputies to re-examine everything they believed about their communities. Sheriff Daniel Reeves, who led the investigation into Robert Owens, captured this shift in a report that circulated through departments across the state. We look for the threat at the periphery. Owens taught me that sometimes the greatest threat is sitting across from you at the coffee shop, wearing a friendly smile and asking about your family. The realization that danger could be so ordinary, so woven into daily life, upended the very foundation on which small towns rested. Trust had always been the currency of these communities. People left doors unlocked, shared meals at church socials, and felt certain they knew the people around them. But the cases of Owens, Blackwood, and others stripped away that certainty. Neighbors who had once hosted backyard barbecues or shared rides to school now questioned every memory, every interaction. For the sheriffs tasked with keeping order, the old ways of policing, rooted in the assumption that evil came from outside, no longer applied. The enemy, they learned, could be anyone. Sheriff Maya Cortez's experience in Pinewood County stands as a testament to how deeply these cases changed the work of law enforcement. After Gabriel Mercer was found living in the walls of Ellen Blackwood's home, Cortez's department launched a painstaking review of every property tied to Edmund Blackwood. Her team inspected 17 homes, each revealing evidence of hidden passages or concealed observation points. Some spaces were so well disguised they would have remained undiscovered without Mercer's maps. Residents who had lived peacefully for years suddenly found their homes transformed into crime scenes, their sense of safety shattered by the discovery of secret rooms used for watching or hiding. One homeowner broke down as deputies revealed a hidden crawl space behind her closet, a reminder that the ordinary could be anything but. The impact didn't stop at property lines. Cortez's task force became a model for other counties facing similar fears. New procedures required inspections of homes with certain architectural features before sale, and current homeowners received instructions for identifying hidden spaces. The psychological toll on Cortez was lasting. She described her work as a permanent shift, explaining, "This job stops being about protection. It becomes about suspicion, where it should land, how far it should go, and how to live with what it does to you." The sense of violation was not just physical but emotional, a wound that changed how she viewed her neighbors and her own home. In Iron County, Michigan, Sheriff Mark Callahan faced a different kind of reckoning. Martin Blackwood had been a friend and mentor, a man trusted to guide others through the wilderness. Callahan had walked the same trails with him, never suspecting that Blackwood was responsible for the disappearances that haunted the region. The shock of betrayal led Callahan to overhaul every protocol for missing person cases. Trails were recharted with GPS, and new cross-jurisdictional alerts ensured that disappearances were no longer investigated in isolation. Background checks became mandatory for all wilderness instructors, and the Iron County Wilderness Center, once a point of pride, underwent a complete reorganization. The reforms were practical, but the damage to trust ran deeper than any policy could fix. Callahan found himself returning to the same trails, each step a reminder of what had been missed. The sense of loss was not just for the lives taken, but for the belief that he truly knew those around him. "You hear about wolves in sheep's clothing," he said, "but what you don't realize is how easily a wolf can look like family." The lesson was clear. Vigilance must extend to everyone, even those who seem most reliable. The personal cost of these cases weighed heavily on the sheriffs. Reeves, after Owens's arrest, described sleepless nights and the slow erosion of faith in the fabric of small-town life. Sheriff Darlene Harper, after the Frank Denton case, installed security cameras at her home and changed her daily routines, a quiet admission that even those tasked with protecting others could become targets themselves. The psychological scars were lasting. Harper later admitted, "I wasn't just worried about new threats. I was worried about old ones I might have never seen." For these officers, the line between their professional vigilance and personal fear blurred, leaving them in a state of constant alert. These experiences shaped the next generation of law enforcement training. Sheriff Reeves developed the Watchman Protocol, a program designed to teach rural officers how to identify predators who exploit trust and familiarity. The curriculum, now required in police academies across 17 states, emphasizes the subtle warning signs that can be missed when officers assume evil wears an obvious face. Reeves explained, "Robert Owens was hiding in the light, in plain sight, counting on our human tendency to trust what seems familiar." The Watchman Protocol teaches officers to question their assumptions and to recognize that the most dangerous threats may be those they see every day. Other sheriffs contributed their own lessons. Sheriff Harper began lecturing at the State Police Academy, using the Weber case as a cautionary tale. Her central message was simple and chilling. The most dangerous predators are often those who are watching the investigators, not the ones making mistakes. These stories became required reading, not for their sensational details, but for the uncomfortable truths they exposed about the limits of perception and the vulnerability of trust. The cases also forced a re-evaluation of interagency cooperation. Sheriff Holloway, after the Desert Pines motel case, worked with federal agencies to develop a cross-jurisdictional alert system for disappearances along highway corridors. This system allowed patterns to be identified that might otherwise go unnoticed. In Iron County, Callahan's reforms included improved coordination between jurisdictions for missing person cases in remote areas, ensuring that information flowed quickly and that no case was left in isolation. These changes addressed the systemic failures that had allowed predators to operate for so long, and they became models for departments across the country. At their core, these cases exposed a breach of trust that could not be repaired by policy alone. The sheriffs had to accept that the most dangerous threats might come from those they knew best, and that the familiar could become a mask for evil. Sheriff Reeves wrote, "The hardest lesson wasn't learning how to catch predators. It was learning how many faces could wear the disguise." The stories of Owens, Blackwood, and others became reminders that evil can blend seamlessly into the routines and rituals of daily life. For viewers, the lesson is both unsettling and essential. The sheriff's stories ask us to reflect on who we trust and why, to consider the possibility that danger may not always come from the outside. The changes these cases brought to law enforcement were hard-won, born of loss and betrayal, but they serve as a warning for all of us. As we move forward, the challenge remains: to stay vigilant, to question the familiar, and to remember that sometimes the greatest threats are those we least expect. And as these lessons settle in, one truth stands out. The most dangerous predators aren't always hiding in the shadows. Sometimes they're right in front of us, wearing a smile. Trust, once so natural in small towns and tight-knit communities, now comes with a shadow. Sheriff Reeves warns that the real danger often watches from the heart of our daily lives. Sheriff Cortez reminds us that the walls themselves can hide eyes. Sheriff Callahan's experience proves the wilderness can harbor more than just natural threats. It can hide those who know how to use the land against us. Have you ever sensed something was off in your own neighborhood, or noticed details that others seem to overlook? Share your thoughts below. If these predators thrived for decades, what other secrets might be hiding in plain sight?